And Then She Saw, the prequel to the Tessa Extrasensory Agent series. Written by Kafir Luzado. Narrated by Claire Duncan. Chapter 1. Sometimes, when I was left alone in a cold basement with whitewashed walls that made me doubt where the room began and how far it reached, I wondered how I had ended up here. At other times, when middle-aged men in business suits asked me to describe to them pictures that popped up in my head after they showed me maps, numbers, or strange drawings, I wondered where all those pictures came from. Occasionally, I was trained to do things I didn't understand, for purposes I didn't know. I often met boys and girls my age, and sometimes made friends. Still, most friendships didn't last because my new friends disappeared without an explanation when they were deployed to other tasks. A glance at their bed in the morning was enough to tell me it hadn't been slept in. After a while, I started to doubt my memories. Now, 3 years later, everything is clear and makes sense, but there were times when I wondered how come I wasn't at school and where everyone else had gone. I was confused then, but no more. I remember the exact moment it began. You would too, if it had happened to you. Even today, I wonder how I could have avoided it, but I guess it was inevitable. Imagine gazing at a wall and seeing it disappear, making room for the image of a street, like the wall wasn't there. But I knew that what was behind that wall was not the street I saw. It was the neighbor's garden. The image of the street that had replaced my wall, I recognized as one 3 blocks away. How spooky is that, huh? I was 13 at the time, and really not ready for weird stuff like that. I closed my eyes, breathing heavily to chase that vision away. And when I reopened them, the wall was back in place. I decided that I had been dreaming. Perhaps it was the stress of my date with Daniel. I didn't tell you about Daniel, did I? He was the most popular boy in my class, and I was sure that he didn't even know I existed. But that morning, he had spoken to me. To me. "Hey, Tessa," he had said, and all I could do was keep from fainting. "Everybody's meeting for ice cream this afternoon. Wanna come?" "Wanna come? Want to come?" he asked. My head was spinning, but I never lose my cool. Well, almost never. So I said, "Sure, if I'm not busy." "Cool. I hope you can make it," he said, and gave me a gentle squeeze on the shoulder before walking away, which almost made me faint. I don't want you to get the idea that I was a timid little girl back then. Obviously, I wasn't the kick-ass telepath and extrasensory agent, ESA for my peers, that I am now. But I was really cool. Just not with boys, yet. I was so surprised that Daniel had asked me out that I plain forgot to ask where they planned to meet. That's why I was sitting in my room, sulking and gazing at the wall, asking myself over and over again how stupid I could be not to ask a simple question. And here's the weird thing. The view of that street, the one that showed up where my room's wall was supposed to be, made sense. It did because of the ice cream place that was right there in the middle of the image. I had never bought ice cream there, but I knew that some boys from my class met at that place after school. I took it as a divine sign, a way for God to tell me that, even though I had been dumb enough not to ask where I would meet Daniel, I didn't deserve to miss my date with him. So, after that piece of reasoning, I jumped up, combed my hair, and ran out. As it turned out, that was the right ice cream place, but what I walked into wasn't a date by any standard. Daniel was there with some other boys and girls from my class. He said, "Hi," when I arrived, but that was pretty much the extent of our exchange that day. In later weeks, we became a lot closer, but that's another story. Right now, we need to concentrate on the events that ended up messing up my life forever. I had completely forgotten about that day's events, but 2 weeks later, my parents took my little brother and me to visit with some friends. I knew it would turn out to be a dull afternoon, and I couldn't understand why they insisted on taking us with them when all we did was sit and wait the visit out. So I was gazing out of the window, hoping that the ordeal would end soon, when something caught my attention. "Dad," I cried. "Dad!" "Yes, Tessa, what is it?" he asked, obviously annoyed. "Can't you see that I am talking?" "Yes, but Dad, someone's breaking into your car." "Nonsense. Why do you say that?" "I've seen it. I swear I've seen it. He broke the window on the driver's side and took your cellular phone." "Tessa, you're really aggravating. You know that the car is parked 2 blocks away. You can't see it from that window. You're just being difficult because you didn't want to come today," said my mother. "No, I swear I've seen it. You'll see when we get there." "That's enough, Tessa," said my father, speaking severely. "Now be quiet and behave yourself. We'll leave when we are ready." 1 hour later, my parents said goodbye to their hosts, excusing themselves profusely for their daughter's behavior. Imagine the excitement when we found that the car had been broken into and my father's cell phone stolen. My brother said, "Cool," and was immediately silenced by my father. My parents were clearly in shock. "Incredible," my father murmured. "There must be an explanation," my mother whispered back. The way my parents dealt with problems was to decide they never happened. If problems did occur, they acted as if they had already been resolved. So this particular incident was never spoken about again. I guess they hoped that if it was a problem that had made me speak those words, it would go away. But as you know, it only got worse. That's what problems usually do when you ignore them. Chapter 2. "This is the 3rd time you are late this week, Tessa," ESA 15 complained. He waited for me in what was called the orientation room at the base. I haven't told you how I ended up being at the base and what it was, right? I'll tell you in a jiffy, but right now, it's enough for you to know that the base was home to a secret government agency. To this day, I don't know everything that went on there, and much of what I know, I can't tell you. Anyway, the base had a central building divided into training and operations. At first, I was in training and knew nothing about what the people in operations did. ESA 15 was a big boss there, although I can't recall having ever been told his exact rank or position. I'll tell you about ESA 15, my personal trainer, in a minute. But first, I want to give you an idea of what the training base was like to me, at least during my first week there. In a nutshell, I hated every second of it. So when ESA 15 reprimanded me, I made it a point to get on his nerves. I had to take a shower, you know. Some other people around here don't mind smelling bad, but I do. Your training is boring anyway, I answered. Very well, Tessa. I see you insist on being insolent and arriving late for training. Guard, he called, addressing one of the uniformed stooges that silently haunted each room of the base. Take Tessa to Solitude and see that she gets her dinner there. I gave him the finger, and then I gave it to the stooge, too. I like to be fair and equitable. Better being in Solitude than here with you, I said, and showed ESA 15 my back. If you haven't guessed it already, Solitude is the brand of detention that was in use at the base. I had already tasted it on the second day after my arrival. You are locked in a room for as long as your transgression requires, with nothing to do except gazing at the wall. If you prefer to lie on the uncomfortable bed, made uncomfortable on purpose, mind you, you pass the time looking at the ceiling. I had plenty to do while in solitude. I spent time hating ESA 15. On the morning after my arrival, I was summoned to a bare room where ESA 15 was waiting for me. He was friendly enough, at least at first. "I hope you slept well, Tessa. I want to give you a few ground rules for your stay here. You must understand what is expected of you. This is not a regular school. It's an elite program. The other children you will meet have different potentials and will receive personalized education, just as you will. I am your assigned trainer, and my name is ESA 15. "Isn't your name Smith?" I asked. He'd introduced himself to my parents and me as Professor Smith. "You will call me ESA 15, and that's all you need to know," he said, without answering my question. "But what do you mean by training?" "You will see in time. Meanwhile, the most important thing for you to understand is that everything we do here is top secret. You are not allowed to talk about it with anybody. You are permitted to call your parents once a week and to visit them once a month for a weekend. We will monitor what you say very closely during all those times. Don't ask me how. If you mention anything about what we do here to anybody, you will be charged with a breach of secrecy and will go away for a very long time. Away means jail." As you can imagine, he had me spooked, but I wasn't going to take bull from him. "Then I don't want your stupid elite program, and I don't want to know anything about what you do here. I'm going home." "I'm afraid that it's a bit more complicated than that. Your parents signed a document that makes me, or people designated by me, your legal guardian until your 18th birthday. I'm afraid that you're stuck here with me. Now go to your room and think about what I've told you. The sooner you understand the rules, the happier you will be here." That was ESA 15 in a nutshell. If you met him outside, as my parents did, you thought him a nice, middle-aged, soft-spoken man. You would guess him to be a teacher or a clerk. But at the base, he revealed himself for the devil he was. I see that I've been rambling on about him, and you may be confused. It's time I gave you some context. It all started the week of my 14th birthday. It was a Friday afternoon when ESA 15 knocked on our door. He didn't call himself that then, of course. He introduced himself to my father as Professor Smith and the head of a prestigious program for gifted children, sponsored by the Ministry of Education. My father respects the government, and God knows why. He believes everything it says. So this fake professor, with a phony name, told him that I had been selected from among thousands of children my age for a fully funded elite education. The selection was because of my exceptional qualities, or so he said. All that remained for him to do was put the contract before my parents to sign. That was the contract that turned me into government property until my 18th birthday. I should have smelled a rat right away, because my school grades were nothing to be proud of. In fact, in some classes, a B+ was all I hoped for. I was bright enough for an A on any test, but I found myself at that confusing point in life when you discover that boys exist, and you spend time thinking sweet thoughts about them instead of studying. True, my dealings with boys were entirely innocent, but regardless, they diverted my attention from history and geography. Daniel's invitation to the ice cream place had been a first move, followed by a real date. He took me to a movie, and that's where he first kissed me. And I got so confused that I can't even remember what movie it was. Daniel and I went out for a while, but eventually he dumped me on account of me being a freak. More about that later. When the fake professor knocked on our door, I was in that stage of mourning when you conclude that your life has ended and you would never love again. Besides, as I'll tell you later, I had run out of friends, so there was nothing to keep me chained to my home. In fact, I was happy to go away. Far, far away from Daniel and his stupid friends, and I put up no resistance at all. The next week, Professor Smith came to pick me up, and my new and messed up life began. My father and mother had been cautious. Like the good parents they are, they had duly called the number at the Ministry of Education that was printed on the contract. They made sure that the professor was legit and was not kidnapping me to sell me as a sex slave. That's pretty much the effort they spent learning what my unique education program was about, though. In retrospect, that was a good thing. It saved me the need to lie too much on the few occasions when I came home or talked to them over the phone. We drove in the professor's car for hours, and I fell asleep. I woke up when the car stopped at a gate. It was already dark outside. "Where are we?" I asked. "This is your new home, Tessa," he said. "This is where you will live and study." A uniformed guard peeped through the window, waved at the professor, and opened the gate. The car rolled on a narrow path between low buildings and came to a halt outside a higher, central structure. "Good evening, Marjorie," said the professor to an elderly woman who waited at the door. "This is Tessa. Please show her her room and see if she needs anything for tonight." "Welcome, Tessa," said the woman. She smiled, but her eyes were not smiling. "I'll see you tomorrow morning," said the professor. I nodded and stepped in, dragging my little suitcase with the few belongings I considered essential and had taken with me. "Leave everything," the professor had said. "The program has funds to look after all your needs, including clothing, medical treatment, and anything else you might need." Well, I needed my teddy bear, without which I hadn't been able to sleep since I was 9 years old. But as it turned out, I hadn't got a private room. The one where the Marjorie witch took me had 4 beds, and I saw girls sleeping in 3 of them. I couldn't let anybody know that I was still hugging my teddy bear in bed, so it never left my suitcase. That was the night I said goodbye to my childhood. Chapter 3. The first week at the training base was beyond boring. ESA 15 made me sit in Dullsville with people who spoke to me about maps, coordinates, and other tiresome stuff. They also gave me drawing paper and pencils and insisted that I show them that I knew how to draw houses, trees, and other stuff. I had come to view solitude as relief from sitting with those bores. The morning after my little clash with ESA 15, the one that got me sent to solitude, the guard who came to let me out took me to a cold basement room with no windows. ESA 15 waited for me there. "I hope you put your alone time to good use. You said that our training was boring, so we'll make it more interesting from now on. A man is sitting in the room next to this one. He has an object with him. I'll leave you alone, and I want you to concentrate and draw that item. You have paper and pencils on the table. Is that clear?" "It's clear to me that you're crazy. If the thing is in another room and I can't see it, how do you want me to draw it? I can't draw something I've never seen." "Just open your mind and draw what comes to it. Concentrate on the fact that there is an object behind this wall, and think what it is." "You're nuts," I said. "Maybe, but humor me. You have nothing to lose," he said. He left the room, locking the door behind him. The man was clearly mad, but if I wanted to get out of that room, I had to humor him, as he had said. I gazed at the wall, and then I closed my eyes and let images come to my mind. I didn't force any image, but simply opened my mind to whatever came. I soon saw a shape that looked like a triangle sitting on a cube before my mind's eyes. The cube had a few lines on it that looked like scratches. I took a piece of paper and drew it. I went to the door and kicked it, shouting, "I'm done," until the key turned in the lock and ESA 15 walked in. "Here's my doodle," I said, handing him the paper. "Now that I've done what you wanted, I want to get out." ESA 15 gazed at my paper, transfixed. He remained like that for so long that I thought he was having a stroke. "Come with me," he said at last. "I want to show you something." He grabbed my hand, pulled me out of the room, and pushed the door of the one next to it. He turned on the lights and said, "This is the object." It was my turn to be in shock. On a metal table, pretty much like the one I'd been drawing on, was a beautiful dollhouse with a gable roof. That accounted for the triangle I had seen in my mind. "Do you see now why you're here, Tessa? Do you understand how special you are?" said ESA 15, and for the first time, there was emotion in his voice. I don't know what to say," I said, and I really didn't. Something that doesn't often happen to me. "Say that you want to learn about your gift and develop it, instead of letting it go to waste." "But how did you—" "We've been following you for some time now. We understand your gift more than you do." It dawned on me that it was my stupid mouth that had gotten me there. I already told you about the ice cream place and my father's car being broken in. Those weren't the only two events. It happened to me several times, but most of the time, I wasn't even sure that what I was seeing was not mere imagination. I'm not a blabbermouth, but a 13-year-old girl needs to speak with someone about things that bother her. I debated whether to talk to my sister, but I knew that she would make fun of me. She always made fun of my worries. I now understand that she meant well and simply wanted me to take things more lightly. But I didn't feel like telling her that I was seeing things that were not there. I knew what the outcome would be. So I decided to talk to Kendra, my BFF, the one I shared my secret thoughts with, about boys, looks, problems with my parents, and everything else. She did the same, and I knew that she never gossiped about my personal issues. But my visions were too juicy for her to keep to herself. She told one of her friends, in confidence, of course, and soon everybody was laughing at me behind my back. My schoolmates had decided that I was a whack. It went on for a while before I found out, and I think that Daniel dumped me because he couldn't afford to have a declared freak for a girlfriend. So, my visions caused me to lose my first boyfriend and my best friend Kendra, who had betrayed my trust. Even before Daniel dumped me, I understood that I needed to show people that I wasn't fantasizing. If I wanted to save my social status from being completely ruined, that is. That wasn't easy, because I had no control over those episodes. They happened when they happened. But one day, I had what I thought was a lucky break. We were in math class, and suddenly, a vision popped up before my eyes. I saw that our literature teacher, Miss Lampert, had fallen down the stairs that led to the school's parking lot. She was whimpering with pain and couldn't get up. I jumped up in the middle of the lesson. "Miss Lampert is hurt," I cried. "We must help her." "What are you talking about, Tessa?" our math teacher asked. He was obviously annoyed. "I saw her," I insisted. "She fell down the stairs that lead to the parking lot, and she's hurt. She can't get up, and she needs help." "This is only in your mind, Tessa," the teacher said, shaking his head. "Instead of dreaming, listen to what I'm trying to teach you." That was when Kendra spoke. "Tessa can see things. It's true. If she says that Miss Lampert is hurt, then we must go and help her," she said. She was probably trying to make amends by helping me, but she was the one who had put me in that spot to begin with. And helping me didn't fix my broken trust in her. The teacher could no longer ignore it, or the chatter from my excited classmates, and left the class murmuring, Idiotic nonsense. He told us to remain in class, but of course we flocked after him. We found Miss Lampert precisely as I had said, and she was rushed to the hospital. Since that day, everybody looked at me differently, but mostly not in a positive way. I guess that some feared me, and others thought me a nutcase. My mother heard the rumors and asked me about them, but she was happy to brush the whole subject aside when I told her it was just a joke. As it turned out, the government heard about it too, and didn't think it a joke. My luck, whether bad or good, is still an open question. Chapter 4. The week after my first remote viewing experiment, ESA 15 looked happier than I had ever seen him. He spoke gently to me and wasn't annoyed by my sarcastic comments. I use sarcasm to feel better when I'm not in control of the situation, and I guess he understood that. During that week, we ran several other remote viewing experiments with entirely different objects from one experiment to the other. ESA 15 said they were all successful, although he never showed me the actual thing I was drawing after the first time. In the second week, we had a change of pace. A guard guided me to the same room where ESA 15 waited for me, but this time, the instructions were different. "This is getting monotonous, you know," I said to him. "I know, Tessa. That's why we are going to do something a little more difficult today. See this map here? This blue dot is where we are. The red dot is a building with a characteristic shape. The building coordinates are written here," he added, pointing at letters and numerals written on a white piece of paper. "You are to draw this building. You could do more than one drawing and give us different views from different sides, whatever you see." "But why are you giving me these coordinates? I can't read them, and I don't know what to do with them." "That's our standard procedure. You don't have to use them if you have no need." "Oh, all right." I must say that I had started to enjoy this game. Guessing right every time was exciting, and I had come to look forward to it. That's why he was so bummed when, this time, no shape of any description came to my mind. I sat there for maybe an hour, but nada. ESA 15 must have realized what was happening because he unlocked the door and came to me without speaking. "I'm sorry," I said. "I don't know what happened." "It's okay, Tessa. It happens. Don't worry. We'll try again tomorrow." ESA 15 was wise. He left me alone for the rest of the day, without any more training or class. The base had a recreation room, and I spent a few hours in it, playing video games, watching TV, and reading. On the next morning, ESA 15 repeated the instructions. He had barely locked the door from the outside that images started popping up in my mind. They were strange images, not entirely clear, and I let them dance in my head for a while. I drew what I saw, and then I banged on the door to let ESA 15 know that I was finished. He unlocked the door and came in. "How was it, Tessa?" he asked. I saw the building. Or at least I think it was a building. It had a tower of sorts, and beside it, something that looked like a half orange. That's the best I can describe it, but look at the drawings. You'll see for yourself. ESA 15 took a quick look at the page I had handed him and smiled. "Come with me, Tessa," he said. "Where to?" I asked. "We are going to take a little trip. There is something I want to show you." I hadn't left the base since the day I got there. I was asleep, and it was dark on that day, so I knew nothing about our surroundings. I was happy to see a little of the world outside. ESA 15 led me to the same car with which he had picked me up from home. I sat in the passenger seat, and he drove on. "You don't talk much," I commented, after 15 minutes of silence. "In our profession, not talking much is a virtue." "What is your profession?" I asked. "That is one of the things we don't talk about. But look here. We have arrived." The car had stopped next to a building. A big sign on it said Opera House, and I was left speechless. The building was made of two separate structures, the first of which was a 4-story building. Beside it, a majestic dome dominated the scene. It wasn't exactly how I had seen it, but it was close enough. I got out of the car and walked toward the building, hypnotized. I needed to see the backside, which, in my mind, I had seen as straight and not curved like in the front. ESA 15 said nothing and didn't call me back. He just stood there, watching me. When I reached the backside of the building and saw that it was pretty much like I had seen it, I was in awe. I don't know if that feeling was for myself, or for the universe, or for something else, but I felt the urge to run away, to get back to the safety of the car and the confidence that the presence of ESA 15 inspired in me. He stood by the car, waiting for me, and I faced him in silence. "I wanted you to see this, Tessa," he said. "I wanted you to understand how powerful you are and how special you are. That's why you're here. And if you let me, I will help you to maximize your gift." I found it difficult to speak right then, so I just nodded. He opened the car door for me, and we drove in complete silence back to the base. Chapter 5. I didn't describe the training base to you, and I think it's important for you to get at least a rough idea. It wasn't a cheerful place for sure, but it wasn't too bad either. In retrospect, what I found oppressive was the emptiness. The building where I lived was huge, with endless corridors and more classrooms than I could count. The only people there, if you didn't count the guards who barely spoke a word, if ever, were 4 girls, me included. That, of course, without counting ESA 15, and the woman Marjorie, who was a housekeeper of sorts. The few other people with whom I interacted, teachers, instructors, came from outside, and that's why in the evening, when lessons were over, the place felt hauntingly empty. The food was decent, but not as good as what my mother cooked. Well, perhaps I should exclude breakfasts. Breakfast was a quick affair at home, something we did so we would not be hungry at school. On the other hand, at the training base, the breakfast table was lavish. We could ask for anything we wanted, from pancakes to meat, if we wanted to, which I never did. Still, knowing that I could be wild with my breakfast order was nice. In contrast, lunch and dinner were pretty average, and there wasn't much variety to choose from. But again, it was kind of okay. I shared a room with 3 other girls, and I don't have a clue as to why they were there or what they were doing. We were not allowed to share information about any part of our training. What's the sense of being in the same room with 3 other girls if we cannot talk, share stories, or support one another if we needed? I asked ESA 15 after a few days. "That's how you learn to keep information to yourself. That's how we test you and make sure that we can trust you with classified information." "That sucks," I said. "You're just being sadistic," I threw at him. "I understand that you're upset, but you're not here to make friends. You're getting an education that may save your life in the future. When it does, you will thank me." "I doubt it." "You will." "Never. I'll never thank you for being wicked." I did, eventually, but that's another story. The recreation room had different rules, and that helped a little. While playing video games there or watching TV, we were allowed to socialize, as long as we limited our conversation topics, so they had nothing to do with our training. We were also not allowed to speak about our previous life, our home, and our family. As a result, we didn't have much to talk about. I met the other girls there, but we never developed a real relationship. So much so that I have forgotten their names, perhaps intentionally. In the evenings, we seemed to put more effort into avoiding one another than in finding permissible topics of conversation. Our exchanges were pretty much limited to information about who was planning to go to the shower and when, and would we please turn off the stupid light because I want to sleep. Things like that, making an effort to remain strangers. It was unavoidable that I should snap. Rebellion is in my blood. One evening, as we were preparing to go to bed, I addressed the girl who slept next to me. "Where are you from?" I asked. She didn't answer. "Why are you here?" I insisted. "Please stop," she said. She looked worried, even scared, but I was relentless. "I'll tell you about myself first," I said. I wanted to see if what ESA 15 had told me, that they were listening to us all the time, was true, or a load of crap. The reason they brought me here is that I see things. Do you see things too? "Please stop talking. You will have us all punished." She was almost crying. "Do you see things that are not here?" I insisted. I was going to say more, but right then, our room's door opened. 2 uniformed guards rushed in, grabbed me, and dragged me, kicking and screaming, into solitude. As a rule, I didn't mind being in solitude, but this time, they switched off the light and left me in complete darkness. That's when I understood that ESA 15 meant business and stopped rebelling. I kept on finding simple ways to annoy him, but those hours in the dark helped me understand that I had to fall in line. On the next day, I was left alone. Nobody spoke to me. No classes were scheduled for me, and nobody told me what to do. It was like I didn't exist. My roommates ignored me, and every now and then, they took turns shooting me venomous glances. That was fine by me. I didn't feel like talking to them either. Luckily, I had a book I hadn't finished yet, which kept me company until bedtime. In the morning, I was summoned to my regular viewing room, where ESA 15 was waiting for me. He didn't mention solitude, or the incident with my roommate, acting as it had never happened. "Well, Tessa, today we'll try something else. All the targets with which we experimented so far were in the next room or nearby. Now we are going to try something a little more difficult. This red dot on the map is a place in a foreign country. It is one known to us, and we know what it is that you may see, at least approximately. But of course, I won't tell you. Here are the coordinates. I'll leave you to it." He concluded and left the room. I was sore at him, as you can imagine, so I kept silent. At first, I toyed with the idea of doing nothing, and telling him that I had tried, but seen nothing. But I'm curious by nature, and the idea of trying to see something thousands of miles away tickled me. So I cursed ESA 15 silently in my mind, and then I closed my eyes after a last look at the map and at the coordinates. I was sure that those coordinates were useless, but who knows if they hadn't helped me before to find the place I needed to see. I took another look at them. If it didn't help, it surely would do no harm. At first, images started running through my head like a black and white movie running fast forward. It made me dizzy, but luckily it eventually stopped on one image. It wasn't a very clear one, but I was sure that it was a window in a room looking out to a tall column. I opened my eyes and drew it. It was a simple drawing. In all earlier experiments, opening my eyes made the image go away. But that time, when I closed them again, the image was still there. And this time, there was a sound in my head that I somehow knew was connected to the image. At first, it was like the sound of water rushing down a pipe, but then it changed and sent a shiver along my spine. I jumped up from my seat, ran to the door, and pounded on it until ESA 15 opened it. "What's the matter, Tessa? Why are you excited?" he asked. "I'm not excited. I'm spooked. Look at this. Look at this," I said, pushing the drawing into his hand. "This is great, Tessa. Spot on. But what is so frightening about it?" "It's not it. I was looking at it, and I heard a voice in my head. Am I going crazy? Is it that spending so much time in these rooms is driving me mad?" "A voice? What voice? What did it say?" "It said... It didn't make sense to me, but I think it said, 'There is a problem with the distillation column.' Only it didn't really say that. It was more like a concept, not just words. I can't explain it." ESA 15 looked shell-shocked. He had turned white in the face, his lower lip trembled, and he was clearly struggling for words. It took him close to a minute to regain his composure and speak again. "This is uncanny, Tessa. The place you were viewing is an oil refinery, and what you heard, if heard is the correct word, fits the place you were viewing. You couldn't have known what the site was, so we can rule out that your imagination was in any way affected. We must conclude that you really heard what someone was saying or thinking. Do you know what that means?" "That I'm a freak? That I'm going crazy?" "That you're a telepath. I've never seen anything like that. I'll never tire of telling you, Tessa. You are unique." I don't know why his words caused my reaction, but I burst into tears. I couldn't stop myself from crying, and I cried buckets. ESA 15 watched me crying, looking embarrassed. At last, he got closer and stroked my hair. It was a little gesture, but at that moment, it meant the world to me. Chapter 6. I can't remember exactly how many viewing experiments ESA 15 made me do, but they were many. My confusing and confused telepathic experience repeated itself in only a few of them, but it was enough to conclude that telepathy was a real thing, albeit not one that I had any control over. Although my ability to see structures and draw them improved with time, I was losing interest because, essentially, it was all more of the same. I was happy when ESA 15 summoned me to his office, not to a viewing room. "You have made great progress, Tessa," he said. "It's time to broaden your horizons. You will become a most useful agent, and you still have much to learn. You'll be 15 in a month, and the older you get, the more difficult it will be for you to learn new things. That's why I have enrolled you in the general basic training run by our agency." "I thought this was basic training," I pointed out. "This is special basic training, which is personalized and one-on-one learning. General basic training is for trainees in all branches of our agency. It is not held here, and I will not be one of your instructors there. You will learn new things, different things, and will come back here with broader knowledge that I'm sure will serve you well in the future, even if you don't need it right now as a remote viewer." That was the first time that I had heard the term remote viewer. Is that what I am? A remote viewer? "You are. You have today been officially accepted into the Extrasensory Agency as a remote viewer, an RV. Your official designation is ESA 54. And when you return from general training camp, you will no longer be a trainee. Welcome to the service, Tessa." You seem to think that I should be happy about it, but I don't feel like celebrating. I never signed up for it. "There were circumstances that brought you here. Now that you are a part of this, you must learn to make the best of it. In time, you will learn to appreciate the privilege." I'll be surprised if I do. I had been taken from my wonderfully stupid teenager's world into that of grown-ups who only dealt with weird stuff. What's the privilege in that? General basic training was different from anything I had experienced until then. There were classes in which we learned many different things, mostly dull, but some actually quite cool. We learned to operate radio equipment, night viewing goggles, GPS systems, and others. The best part was when we were taken to a separate camp during what they called exploration weeks. We had 2 of those in which the best thing we explored was sex. General basic training was for girls and boys, although we slept in separate quarters. At the camp, they had a central building with a dining room and a coffee corner with cookies. It also housed 2 classrooms. It was a permanent wooden structure surrounded by portable buildings where we slept. After 2 days of basic training, we were taken to the camp, and an instructor told us what we were going to do. "Welcome to this exploration week," he said. "If you follow a few ground rules, you will enjoy your time here and benefit from what we have to teach you. We have several segments of instruction, and you will be tested at the end of each segment. If you don't pass the test, you will have to leave the camp and go back to where you came from. One thing that you need to pay attention to is that interaction between boys and girls is strictly forbidden, except at the social events that we have planned for you, which I'm sure you will enjoy. At the end of the day, after dinner, you will be tired, I can promise you that, and you will retire to your respective quarters until morning." Those instructions were received with a murmur of dissatisfaction. Our group of about 50 was split almost equally between boys and girls, and we looked forward to socializing. At least, I know I did. We had been kept away from the other sex for too long. I had just turned 15 and was the youngest of the group. The oldest was 16-something. Some kids in the group knew each other from previous training, but most had never met before. I don't know from which agency branches the others came from, because we never spoke about it. We had learned to keep our mouths shut, each one in his own way. I shared a room with a girl named Daisy, and on the second night, as I was preparing to go to sleep, she came close to me and whispered conspiratorially. "Ahem, would you mind sleeping in Sarah's room tonight?" she asked. "What? Why?" "Because, you know Dave, that cute boy that sat next to me in regular training today?" "Yes, what about him?" I asked. "He's coming to me in a little while, and, we want to be alone." "But that's forbidden. You know that," I protested. "You're funny. They're just saying that for the record, but they mean the opposite." "You're kidding, right?" "If I'm wrong, why did they place a large box of condoms next to the coffee machine in the central building?" "I don't know. I didn't notice it. But even if you're right, where would I sleep?" "In Sarah's roommate's bed. She's gone to her boyfriend's room. Will you do this for me?" "Of course, if that's important to you. I'll go. But I'm pretty sure that you're getting yourself into trouble." "Thanks, Tessa. You're delightfully innocent," she concluded with a smile. Well, Daisy was 16 already. 1 year is a significant difference at that age, and I guessed she knew more about all that than I did. Chapter 7. The next morning, when I returned to my room, I was met with Daisy's broad smile. She looked different. Happy. Beaming happiness, actually. And even more beautiful than before. She was a black beauty, tall, with full breasts and amazing white teeth. "Did you?" I asked. "Did I? Oh, girl, did I?" she said, laughing. "Your first time?" I asked. "Dear Jesus, no. My first time was at 14, but this was one of the best." "At 14?" I said to myself. Was I retarded? I had to do something about it. I started to muse on it, but was interrupted by an instructor who stood outside and yelled that we were late for training and needed to hurry up. That morning, training was incredibly cool. We were taken to a firing range, given a gun, an AR-15 assault rifle, they called it. After a lengthy explanation, during which we familiarized with the gun, we went to the firing line. We had to hit cardboard dudes, each of us the one in our own lane. We were given only one cartridge at a time, to make sure that we wouldn't switch to automatic fire and kill everybody around us by mistake. I eventually came to like shooting and was quite good at hitting my cardboard dude. But what happened the first time was that the recoil hit my shoulder hard, making me drop the gun and burst into tears. I never considered myself a little girl who cried on every occasion, but I was a little girl then, and the recoil really hurt. The instructor picked up my gun, looked at me with contempt, and said, "Go sit under that tree and calm down." I sat there, crying silently, mostly because I was ashamed that I had made a spectacle of myself. That's when I met Gary. He was a good-looking boy, blonde hair, blue eyes, perhaps a bit too skinny, but with a winning smile. He was almost 16, or so he said. He came to me, still holding his gun, and kneeled beside me. "Hey," he said, speaking softly. "The same happened to me the first time. I didn't hold the butt well pressed against my shoulder, and the recoil hit me hard. I too wanted to cry. It's natural." I had been gazing at my shoes throughout his speech, and now I lifted my gaze. I don't think it was love at first sight, or love at all, but it certainly wasn't attraction at first sight. I had a flutter in my stomach, pretty much like the one I had felt when Daniel had invited me out for ice cream. I smiled back at him, and I realized that I had stopped crying. "Thank you," I said. "You're welcome," he answered. "Would you like to meet sometime?" I had to say that before the moment passed. "How about tonight?" he asked, and I felt a shiver run along my spine. A good shiver. "Yes," was all I was able to say. That night, it was my turn to ask Daisy to find some other place to sleep. "Why?" she asked. "Someone is coming to spend time with me," I said. And I believe I blushed, which I no longer tend to do nowadays. But again, I was only 15 then. "Could it be that blonde boy I saw you with at the firing range?" "Uh-huh," I admitted. "Girl, you're a fast learner. Good for you." She laughed and didn't ask any further. At dinner, I kept stealing glances at Gary, who was at a nearby table, and a couple of times, I caught him doing the same to me. When I did, he smiled that charming smile of his that brought more flutters to my tummy. After dinner, we went our separate ways. For a while. I waited in my room, and I admit that I was fidgety. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew what I hoped would happen. A knock on the door was enough to make me jump up and run to open it. Gary came in, closed the door behind him, and stood there waiting. I reached behind him and locked the door. Then I went to stand before him and looked him in the eyes. Those beautiful blue eyes. Gazing at each other is a pastime that cannot go on for long, and since nothing was happening, I decided that I had to take the first step. When I kissed him, he unfroze and started performing. He wasn't a great kisser, at least not as good as Daniel, but I didn't care right then. He was good enough. "Have you brought protection?" I asked, when I felt that we had had enough of the kissing stage. "Yes, but," he whispered hesitantly, "are you sure that you want to do it?" "Stop talking or I may change my mind," I said. I started to unbutton his shirt, and he fumbled with the buttons on mine. We were in the middle of it, and he spoke again. "Listen, I need to ask you," he said. "This is really not a good time. I'm kind of busy here," I said. I was panting a little, and the last thing I needed was an excitement killer. "I've never done this before," he insisted. "I don't want to disappoint you." "Neither have I. I don't have anybody to compare you to. You can't disappoint me. Now shut up, will you?" He finally did shut up. Was I disappointed? Well, a little, but I didn't tell him. And then he made up for that disappointment the next time. And the one after that, but you get the idea. As you and I both know, all good things have to end at some point. This one ended swiftly when Gary didn't show up at breakfast one morning. "Where is Gary?" I asked his roommate. "Gone," he said. "Gone where?" I insisted. "No clue," he said. I hate it when someone speaks in monosyllables. "Gone why?" "Flunked this week's test. Pity, but hey, this means that I have the room all to myself. Want to come over tonight?" "You wish," I said, and went out to do a little thinking. So Gary, the first boy I had gone all the way with, had left without saying goodbye. Perhaps they didn't let him, or maybe he didn't want to. I analyzed my emotions. Was I sad? Well, perhaps a little, but I wasn't in love with Gary, and I wasn't looking forward to marrying him and having children together. That was just not in my future with him or anybody else, at least not in the foreseeable future. I had liked him, though, and I felt a pang of sadness, knowing that I wouldn't be seeing him again. But then I realized that there was also good in that. We wouldn't have to say goodbye and make promises we knew we wouldn't keep. In fact, that was quite a neat way to end it. So the romance was gone, but the sex craving was still very much alive and kicking. I suspect that our instructors put something in our water to make us hypersexual. In retrospect, that made sense if they wanted us to become heartless operatives who would not be easily distracted by feelings for other people. I asked ESA 15 whether my theory was correct when I returned to the base, but he skirted the question, which means I was right. I had no trouble replacing Gary. Volunteers were plentiful, and I only had to choose. But something was lost. The thrill of my first time all in with a boy who was no longer there. I kept trying to recapture it, but it was gone. Chapter 8. I never thought that I would be happy to be back at the base, but I'd had enough of all the stupid training, and also of the sexual innuendos of some of the boys, which were gross. "Welcome back, Tessa. How did you enjoy general training?" ESA 15 asked. Some of it was okay, and some less than okay. "You can't be less informative than that. Anyway, did you learn anything useful?" "I'm not sure. For instance, can you tell me why I need to learn survival tactics when all I do is sit in a room without windows with a sheaf of paper and pencils? I know there may be cockroaches in those rooms occasionally, but I don't think that the tactics I learned will help me deal with those." "I see that your tongue is getting sharper by the day," said ESA 15, fighting to hide a smile. "Right now, you sit in a room, as you say, but as an agent you may be deployed to different locations, and some of those may be danger spots, hence the need to learn survival tactics." "Whatever. I'll be happy with the danger if I can get out of here and see more daylight." "Well, then I have good news for you. You're going home on vacation for a whole week. You have earned it. I just saw your evaluation from your instructors, and you were at the top of the class." Happy as I am to take a break from this place, I don't know how to behave with my family now. You don't know my mother. She will want to have a complete description of my school. New friends, personalized curriculum, and so on, down to the wallpaper's design. What am I going to tell her? She is worse than the Inquisition. "You didn't think that we would overlook the problem, did you? Here is a dossier that has all the answers to your questions," he said, handing me a binder. "You need to memorize it today and tomorrow before you leave for home." I browsed through the folder, and some of which I read looked utterly absurd to me. It says here that the institute where I learn is studying my brain, and because of confidentiality issues, I am not allowed to talk about it. According to this, I should say that I don't even understand some of the experiments we are doing. This is ludicrous. Studying my brain? It is rather quite evident that with the achievements you showed in our personalized study program, we would decide that you are the perfect subject for it. Of course, the aim is to help us understand how we can improve our study programs for the general population. The last document in the folder is your quarterly evaluation, and you will see that all your grades are either A or A+. Please have it signed by your parents, as required on the last page. They will be pleased. Are you making fun of me? No, I'm protecting you, and I'm teaching you how to protect yourself. Now go and memorize. At the train station, I took a taxi cab home. As soon as it turned into my street, my heart started pounding so fiercely that I expected the driver to ask me about it. I hadn't taken anything with me from the base, except what I was wearing, and I looked forward to wearing some of my old stuff again. As it turned out, in the few weeks I had spent away from home, I had put on weight enough to outgrow most of my clothes, but my sister Michelle came to the rescue with some of her old things. Look at you. You are even more beautiful than when you left, if that's possible. And you have grown. How tall you are, were my mother's first words as she opened the door. We've been waiting for you. Come, Jeffrey. Michelle, Tessa is here, she yelled back into the house. Yes, Mom, I may have grown 1/10 of an inch in height, although I'm not sure, I said. But you've put on some flesh, sis, said Michelle with a smile after she hugged me. You're no longer the shrimp you used to be. I get a lot of exercise, and the food is good, I said. You hated exercise, said Mother. That school is really doing you good. You must tell me all about it. I smiled to myself, thinking that my mother would have a fit if she knew the kind of exercise I'd been having at the camp. My father came along and gave me a paternal hug, after which I went up to my room to organize, because dinner was near. Jeff had shown little or no interest in me, outside of saying, "You look cool," which pretty much summed up the vocabulary he used when speaking to me. After dinner, my mother started with the 3rd degree, so I pleaded fatigue from the trip and a headache for good measure, and excused myself. I knew that my real headache would begin the next day, when word of my arrival reached my former classmates. The next morning, sitting at the breakfast table, life felt kind of normal again, at least for a while. Michelle wasn't up yet. Tired because of her demanding work, my mother said. Michelle worked part-time in a fashion shop at the mall, and she had always slept late on Saturdays. Still, my mother liked to live in a world of her own, in which everything was neatly placed in the order that fit her need for organization. I had learned a long time ago not to disturb it. Dad was barricaded behind his newspaper. Jeff ate, making gross chomping noises as usual. It almost felt like I had never left. You should finish breakfast, darling. Your friends will be here soon, my mother announced. Friends? What friends? I asked. Oh, your friends from school, you know. Kendra was so excited when I told her you were visiting. That's my mother in a nutshell. She acts with complete disregard to objective reality, as long as it fits her perception of the world. It didn't matter to her that I had told her 100 times that Kendra and I were no longer friends. In her more convenient reality, we still were. So, Kendra was coming. In a way, I was glad because we had kind of patched things up before I left, at least superficially. I was looking forward to hearing juicy gossip that she was sure to bring. But it was sad that I wouldn't be able to tell my old schoolmates that I was no longer like them, that I had important responsibilities, that people were looking at me and seeing someone special, that people depended on my ability for things of vital importance. Kendra came, bringing 2 other girls from my former class in tow. We exchanged perfunctory hugs and then sat down in my room. Tell me everything that happened since I left, I demanded. Kendra started a long litany, punctuated by giggles, of the other girls. I let my attention wander pretty early on when I realized that who was going out with whom and who had broken up with whom was no longer interesting to me. Kendra must have realized that I wasn't really listening because after a while, she asked, "Do you want to go to the mall? They opened a couple of new places there." "It would be fun," I said. Anything but keeping that awkward conversation going. After trying on clothes we were not planning to buy in a couple of shops, the amusement opportunity was more or less exhausted. The two girls who came with Kendra suddenly remembered something that they had to do and left. Kendra and I bought a couple of sodas and sat in a quiet corner to drink them. "I'm so glad to see you," said Kendra. "Yeah," was the only response I was able to make. "Do you still?" she whispered. "See things, you mean?" "Yes." "Not really. I think it's gone." "That's a shame." "I finished my soda," I said, getting up. "It's getting late. I promised my mother that I would be back in time for lunch." "I'll see you while you're here?" "Yeah," I said, but we both knew that it wasn't going to happen. Chapter 9. I was glad when my vacation was over. It wasn't because I looked forward to going back to work, but I no longer fitted in with my family. They lost interest in me pretty quickly, which was good because they left me alone. They stopped asking questions, so I didn't have to spend a lot of energy lying to them. But while I enjoyed snuggling down in my bed with no place to go and nothing to do except reading and drinking hot cocoa, I got bored after a while. I walked around a lot and ran daily. At basic training, I had amazed myself by discovering that I actually liked to run. Back at school, I had always hated exercise and looked for ways to bail out of sports lessons. But at the training camp, they didn't care if I liked it or not. Our sports instructor was a 30-year-old woman by the name of Helga, and judging by her training methods, she was a direct descendant of the Hitler family. She would wake us girls up at ungodly hours in the morning and make us run until I thought that my lungs would come out with the next breath. And she was mean, too, berating us all the time. "Move your ass. You're not here for a stroll. Look at Cindy," she would yell at me. This Cindy was an obnoxious know-it-all girl. She always had all the answers in class. She knew all about latitudes and longitudes, poisonous mushrooms, and nerdy stuff like that. And the worst of it was that she ran with a smile on her face. Early in the morning, mind you. I hated her self-satisfied demeanor and decided that I would run faster than she. Beating her had become a goal, and I started exercising for it. It happened on the 4th day of my training as a runner. I ran so well that I overtook Cindy. That was when Hitlerjugend Helga shouted, "You are not old woman. Quit crawling and start running. Look at Tessa." Incredible as it was, I realized that I was enjoying running. I no longer felt that I would cough my lungs away from my body. Running was giving me a feel-good sensation I had never experienced before. My daily routine, time permitting, now involves a 5-mile run in the morning. On the 5th day of my vacation, I woke up late, almost at 9 a.m., and went out for my daily run. I must have subconsciously wanted to see my old school, and that's where my feet took me. I had avoided going places where Daniel might be hanging out with friends. I didn't know what emotions seeing him might bring up. And there he was, outside the school, sitting on its steps with a girl I remembered vaguely. I gazed at him from afar and analyzed my feelings, which were nothing. I didn't care. He could have been surrounded by 10 girls, and I wouldn't have cared. Daniel was 1 year my senior, but what I saw when I looked at him was a little boy, busy doing what little boys do. For the first time, I realized how much I had grown and how distant my homeworld was from what I had become. I turned my back to the school building and went on running. You can call that closure, if you like. On Monday, after my vacation, I reported to ESA 15. He waited for me in his office with a smile that made him look almost human. "Welcome back, Tessa. How was your vacation?" "Fine," I said curtly. "What now?" "Now you are a full-fledged extrasensory agent, and things will be different. First of all, here's your badge," he said, handing it to me. I gazed at it. It had my picture with ESA 54 printed beside it. I had never had a badge before, and holding it in my hand made me feel good, like it meant that I belonged somewhere. I raised my gaze from it and waited for ESA 15 to go on. "We are moving you from the basic training wing to the agent's wing. You should know that you're the only one in this agency's history to receive accreditation as an agent at your age. But, of course, you know that you are exceptional, so little wonder that we treat you differently." "What does that mean practically?" "We still need to take care of your education, so your actual work as an ESA will be limited to twice a week. During the other days, you will continue studying according to this syllabus here." He handed me a thin folder, but I didn't look at it. "If I am an agent, I guess I can come and go as I please." "Not quite. You will have much greater freedom than before, and in your free time, you can go into town, see a movie, and do whatever you please, within limits. Being an agent doesn't mean you can forget about discipline. We all must be disciplined. However, you will be treated as an adult in most senses. You do adult work, so you are entitled to be treated like one." "That sounds reasonable," I said. In fact, it was much more than I had expected. "As I said, the agency is making an exception based on my recommendation. Don't make me regret it." "I won't," I said. And I meant it right then. It's a pity that you don't always behave like you meant to. I had never been to the agent's wing. I knew where it was, but I had never had any reason to go there. And in fact, I think we were not allowed to leave the trainees' wing at all. Anyway, to open the door at the end of the corridor that led into the agent's wing, I had to use my badge, which made me feel like a grown-up. The first pleasant surprise was that I had a private room. While I don't mind sharing space with others, I hated being in a room with 3 other girls and never being able to socialize. And besides, I still value my privacy. The agent's wing offered more amenities than given to the trainees, including the free use of the telephone. I didn't really use it much to call home, except for brief conversations to let them know I was alive. Those were almost always only with my mother. "How are you, sweetie?" she would ask, and I would answer, "I'm good." Then she would inquire about school, and I would invariably tell her that I was doing great, which was enough to satisfy her. In reality, my teachers were not formally grading me, but I would get feedback all right, and much more detailed than a simple grade. Now that the atmosphere had changed, I had started to enjoy some of the classes. The one that I liked best was computers. It wasn't a nerdy class like they did back at school. Instead, they taught me how to use the internet and other computer systems and networks to get the information I needed for whatever task I undertook. It was cool to learn how much information is out there that people didn't know they were exposing. Work was light, but boring. I got accustomed to long hours in that empty, whitewashed room where I sat with the sole company of sheets of paper and pencils. Now, when I was in that room, the door was no longer locked, and somehow, that made a difference. I had new handlers now that I was no longer training, so I didn't see ESA 15 as frequently as before, but he made a point to keep informed and talk to me at least 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes my handlers seemed excited by the information I had scribbled on a piece of paper. I never knew why. My rough drawings looked all the same to me. By then, I had got used to experiencing sporadic telepathic connections with whoever was at the location I was given, in whichever country. It usually wasn't much exciting, although realizing that I was receiving somebody else's thoughts always sent a shiver along my spine. However, there was one that stood out from all the others. I think that I simply misdirected and reached a place that I wasn't supposed to visit. When I asked my handler about it, he shrugged and didn't answer the question. When I studied the drawing resulting from the various images in my head, it looked pretty much like a boat on a lake, not really like some North Korean atomic installation, which, judging from the coordinates I was given, was probably the original intention. I memorized the coordinates and checked them afterward. When I closed my eyes to see the images better, this is what I heard. Although heard is not the right word for the sensation that conveyed that meaning to me. Tonight is the night. We will be free or dead. It startled me, and I opened my eyes, happy that the whitewashed walls of the room brought me back quickly to my reality. The feeling and the meaning of those words were all too real to me. I had felt the despair and the determination of the person I had reached. I will never know who he was and what happened to him. That's when I realized that more than being a gift, my ability to hear other people's thoughts was a curse. Chapter 10. The sleeping quarters were a long row of individual rooms facing a wall. The room to the left of mine was unoccupied, but the one to my right belonged to Aline. She was a 21-year-old redhead with a perpetual smile on her lips. To this day, I don't know what kind of work she did there. I only know that she'd been with the agency for the past 5 years. On the very first day of my return from vacation, I was in my room enjoying the privacy and arranging my few personal items that someone had brought there from my old quarters, when somebody knocked on my door. I didn't have the time to say, "Come in." The door opened, and she stepped inside. "Did you say come in?" she asked. It was clear that she knew that I hadn't said anything, and that she knew that I knew it. But her smile was so captivating that I had to smile back. "I didn't, but come in. Make yourself at home," I said. "I'm your next-door neighbor," she announced. "And I wanted to welcome you. But gee, you're so young." "Yes, I get that a lot." "I was more or less your age when I got here, but it took me more than 2 years to get my badge. You must be something special. But since we can't talk about that, forget it. The important thing is that you're here, and you're my neighbor. Anything I can do to help you organize?" "I'm good, but thank you." "Great, but don't forget I'm here if you need anything," she concluded with an even broader smile, and then she floated out as naturally as she had come in. She had made an impression on me. She had fair skin with piercing green eyes, and the perfect figure of a supermodel. My own body had only started to look like that of a woman, and it felt like I was yet to emerge in full from my cocoon. My breasts were still depressingly small, even though they are not large even today. I had never paid great attention to my hair, and seeing her long, flaming hair, that I know now was soft to the touch, made me feel inadequate. That was when I realized how hard it was for a girl my age not to have a best friend that I could talk to. Perhaps Aline could be that friend, I wished. The days passed, and then weeks, monotonously, but quietly, and I got used to my new routine. I had a few run-ins with my geography teacher, whom I particularly disliked, and that earned me reprimands from ESA 15. Occasionally, he took away minor privileges from me, but overall, we kept a balanced respect-hate relationship. I respected him because of his professional attitude, and I hated him because it was his fault that I was there. I derived some pleasure from annoying him when I had an opportunity, but never declared open war on him. Until the party incident, that is. It all started when Aline marched into my room, all dressed up. By then, she had dispensed with the formality of knocking before entering, so I had made it a habit to lock my door when I didn't want to be disturbed. "Why aren't you dressed already?" she complained. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "The party. You need to dress for the party." Can you tell me what you think you're talking about, please? I inquired. Didn't I tell you about the party? Oh, maybe I didn't. Well, anyway, these guys I met in town are giving a party tonight, and you're invited. How am I invited if I never met them? They said any friend of mine is invited, and that includes you. Dress up. I don't have any clothes I can wear for a party, I argued. Nonsense. She brushed it aside. She opened my closet and started rummaging through it. Here, these jeans and this blouse. They will do perfectly, she concluded, handing them to me. Knowing her as I did by then, I knew there was no point in arguing. She could be insistent, and besides, the idea of a party was really exciting. I would have worn a sack to go to it. The base had highly sophisticated access control systems. To leave the building, you had to have a badge that opened an electronic gate for you, through which only one person could pass each time. Aline swiped her at the door, and a green light signaled that she was free to go through. When I swiped my badge, a red light came up, and within seconds a security guard appeared from nowhere. You should wait here, Miss Tessa, he said. What for? What's wrong with this machine? I insisted. You are to wait here, he repeated, and clammed up. This is not good, Aline murmured. 2 minutes later, ESA 15 arrived. What do you think you're doing, Tessa? He asked, speaking tersely. Nothing in particular. We're just going to a party, I answered, trying to make it casual. You're not allowed outside at this time of night. Moreover, you never asked for permission to go. But there are no buts. Please go back to your room. Can't you make an exception, please? Just for once? Aline pleaded. I can't, and I won't. And you should know better, Aline. You can go if you want. I gazed at Aline on the other side of the electronic gate. You go, it's all right, I said. It wasn't all right at all. And right then, I hated ESA 15 more than ever. But I wouldn't let them see me cry. I turned around quickly and almost ran to my room. When I got there, I sat on my bed and let the tears flow down. A knock on the door took me back to the present. Who is it? I asked, speaking hoarsely. May I come in? The question was asked with Aline's melodious voice. I jumped to the door and opened it. Why didn't you go to the party? I had wiped my tears on the way to opening the door. I don't let people see me crying, but I wasn't fooling her. She closed the door behind her, locked it, and came close. I backstepped until my legs met the bed, and then I sat on it. You've been crying, she said, sounding amazed. Why? I tried to ask again. I didn't want to go without you. But you've been crying. I don't know why hearing that spelled out made me cry again, but tears started to flow down my cheeks without control. Aline sat on the bed beside me and held me, saying, There, and massaging my neck and shoulder. After a while, the tears stopped. I pushed back a little and gazed at her straight in the eyes. We must have remained like that for a full minute, perhaps more, until I realized what I had wanted to do all along. I pushed my head forward and kissed her, timidly at first, and then with intensity. She said nothing, simply returning my kiss. I lay down on my bed and pulled her down with me. I didn't want to speak or do anything else that would spoil the magic of the moment. I just lay there, feeling her close, holding her while she held me. She tried to say, but I silenced her. Shh, I whispered. Don't speak. Not today. For the first time in a long time, I closed my eyes and felt that I had someone to love. Then, strange as it might seem, I fell asleep. Chapter 11. Life as an ESA wasn't bad, but it was awfully monotonous. I was glad when ESA 15 called me to his office one day. and announced that I was being deployed to help another unit with a project up north. I can't tell you exactly where that was, because it's a secret, like pretty much everything else I do. But I will tell you that it was a small unit, operating out of a chalet in a small town. The area was beautiful, with a river running through a broad forested valley. However, I didn't get to enjoy it as much as I would have liked to. Most of the time, I was stuck in a basement with pencils and paper, pretty much like back at the base. Still, I had enough free time to sit outside and enjoy the view and the air, and running in those beautiful surroundings in the morning was a big bonus. I missed Aline, though. After that first night, when she had comforted me, we had bonded, and our connection had evolved into much more than just a friendship. Nobody cared about what we did after hours at the base, and so every now and then, Aline slept in my room, or I in hers, and that went a long way toward making me feel that I was not alone in the world. We talked a lot, and at times I wondered how we found so much to talk about when she was much older than I. I brought this up once. "Am I boring you with all this girlish talk?" I asked. "Don't be silly," she said. "You are much more mature than your age, and I find it natural talking to you. Besides, I never had a close friend when I was your age. I'm making up for that now." We cuddled, snuggled, and kissed, but the drive wasn't sexual. It was a need for warmth, friendship, and support. It was the purest love I could imagine, while it lasted. The unit that needed my help consisted of 3 people, 2 operatives in their 30s, Michael and Joyce, and their boss, Julian, who was 50-ish. Julian was untalkative and looked at everybody and everything like they were an obstacle in his way. When he spoke to me at all, he did so in short sentences that didn't invite any conversation. I decided that if he liked to ignore me, I would ignore him back. In contrast, Michael and Joyce were kind and funny and made it a point to invite me often to join them after work. The town didn't offer many recreational opportunities if you didn't count a movie that never changed while I was there. On most days, we spent time at the only local bar, which served pretty decent food. I had been given expense money at the base, so I preferred eating there over having dinner at the chalet. One evening over dinner, Michael offered me his bottle of beer. "Nobody's watching. You can take a sip," he said. "I've never tried it before," I said. Michael knew how to make me feel like a grown-up and never mentioned my age. I wasn't particularly eager to try the beer, but I appreciated the gesture and didn't want to refuse, so I took a sip. The first sip made my nose tickle, and I made a face. Michael and Joyce burst into laughter. "You didn't like it, did you?" Michael asked. "It tastes weird," I said. "You need to take a few more sips to get used to it. When you do, you'll like it," said Joyce. I took 2 more sips, and it made my head swim a bit. "Maybe some other time," I said, handing the bottle back to Michael. That was my last evening out with them, because I was due back to the base in a couple of days. We walked back to the chalet. I still felt a little dizzy because of the beer I had drunk, and went straight to bed. I don't know if I told you this before, but I have the knack of going to sleep whenever I want, in a matter of seconds. I wanted to take that feel-good sensation that the late dinner and the warmth of the bar had given me, together with the alcohol to which I wasn't used to. So I closed my eyes and slept. I had been asleep for maybe an hour when something brought me back to full awareness. My gift works both ways. I wake up as quickly as I go to sleep, and even faster. I was sleeping on my left side, and it took me a second to realize that someone was in bed with me, hugging me from behind. I turned my head, and in the semi-darkness, I saw Michael's face. I pride myself on never losing my cool, but that time, I almost did. "What are you doing? Get the hell out of my bed," I hissed. "Come on. You know you want this as much as I do. I've seen how you look at me," he whispered. I dug my elbow into his shoulder to push him away, and then I turned and sat on the bed. "Listen to me, you creep," I said between clenched teeth. "If you're not out of my room in under 2 seconds, I'll yell and wake everybody up." He froze, gazed at me with loathing, and then he got up and left. That was a good lesson for me. It taught me that people who are nice to you may be the most dangerous ones. It's not that it warped my view of the world, which was already irreparably cynical. It just added another layer to it. I should have reported Michael. After all, I was a minor, and what he did was not just regular sexual harassment in the workplace. But I didn't. Somehow, it didn't feel right to me to go whining to Julian about it. Perhaps I would have reported him to someone more sympathetic than Julian, but I don't know. I thought that Joyce had a thing for him, and she had always been nice to me, so I didn't want to spoil it for her. If something like that happened to me today, it would be an altogether different story. I would kick his ass and make him sorry that he ever met me. But then, nowadays, most people realize pretty quickly that I am not to be messed with. Perhaps my demeanor has changed for the better. I haven't told you about my work with the Northern Unit, simply because there isn't much to tell. My job there was a washout. From the little I was told, I inferred that they were looking for some hidden laboratory or other structure somewhere in the woods. Still, after spending 2 weeks in the stupid basement, I hadn't come up with anything useful. The drill was always the same. For each session, I would get coordinates, sit in the basement, and draw whatever came to my mind. Unfortunately for them, nothing useful came to my mind, and most of the time, I sketched trees. When that became too boring, I added a few squirrels and birds to the trees, just for fun. Once, I actually saw an eagle high in the sky, and drew that too. Judging from the coordinates, they considered a pretty narrow area, but whatever they were looking for was not there. "It's useless. You are useless," said Julian to me at last. "I'm sending you back." "Thank you very much," I said, smiling happily. "The sentiment is reciprocal. You don't seem to be making much progress, with or without me," I pointed out. I hope to annoy him, but it's difficult to get on someone's nerves if he's not listening. One of the perks of the ESA agency's service is that you don't have to worry about transportation. A black vehicle with a silent driver showed up at the appointed time. I ignored Julian, hugged Joyce, and gave Michael a poisonous look before climbing into my ride. All considered, it had been a diversion from the monotonous life at the base, but I was looking forward to seeing Aline again. Chapter 12. Life at the base went on pretty much like before. Every other day, I would go into one of those rooms and draw things I didn't understand and didn't care about. When I wasn't doing that, I had to continue my education, and I don't know which of the two was the most boring. Although I was allowed to visit my parents once a month, I passed on the opportunity several times, simply because home no longer had any attraction for me. One day, ESA 15 called me to his office. "I'm sending you home for a long weekend," he announced. "Thank you, but I think I'll pass." "What's going on, Tessa? You haven't visited your family for 5 months now." "It's just that I don't feel like it. I speak with my mother over the phone, and she knows that I'm all right. I'm telling her all I have to say when I talk to her." "That's not enough. You must maintain a healthy relationship with your family." "That's rich. You telling me that I must keep a healthy relationship is beyond ludicrous. You took me away from my healthy, middle-class family. You turned me into a psychopathic operative, and now you want me to behave like a regular teenager? It's too late for that if you haven't noticed. Your family is asking questions. I get phone calls from your mother complaining that she's not seeing enough of you. You know it's your fault that I have nothing to talk to her about. Everything I do is secret, so what do you want me to do? Make up stories? I will leave the subject of the conversation with your mother to you, but you're going home this weekend. I knew very well that arguing with ESA 15 when his mind was made up was useless, but I liked to do it all the same on principle. Still, I packed my bag with enough clothes for a long weekend and went home. I called my mother before leaving. "Hi, Mom. I'm coming home for the weekend," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Wonderful, sweetie. We really look forward to it. We've been missing you. But I have one condition," I added. "I want this to be a quiet weekend with the family. Promise me that you won't tell anybody that I'm coming, especially not Kendra." "But, sweetie, are you sure? Your friends would be so happy to see you." "I'm sure. Promise?" "Promise." My mother kept her word, for once, and my homecoming was a quiet affair. After a few welcoming noises, my brother and sister made themselves scarce, which was all right with me because I couldn't come up with any topic of conversation with them. My father was fatherly, and most of the time left me alone, although it was nice to see him around and occasionally get a hug or a caress from him. My mother was the one with whom I sparred. On the second day, she cornered me. "Sweetie," she said, "I need to speak with you. I feel that you are shutting us out of your life, and that's not right. I wonder why." "Now you wonder why? You were too willing to send me away. You knew I would be far away from home, but that didn't matter to you. You're being unfair. You're an exceptional girl, and you were offered a unique chance at a top-notch education. No matter how much it hurt to know that you will be far from us, I couldn't take that from you. Besides, you were willing to go." "Yes, I was willing. I was 14 and stupid, and it was your job to make sure that I wouldn't make the stupid decisions I made." My mother grew red in the face and got up from her chair. For a moment, I thought she would say something, but then she simply turned away. I shouldn't have said that, and I would have taken it all back if it were possible, but it was all true. The worst of it was that, like before, I realized that I was looking forward to going back to the base. It had become my real home, and what a shitty home that was. I had to get out and cool off after this confrontation. I closed the front door silently behind me so nobody would ask me where I was going. It was already dark outside. My parents live in a quiet street, pretty much at the edge of the neighborhood. There is a park nearby that at the time was deserted, and I walked toward it. I repeated my conversation with my mother in my head, getting angrier every time. It was the feeling of having been abandoned that got me to talk like that in the first place. But then, I stopped thinking about my mother. Something was nagging at me, a feeling that took the place of anger. Danger. It's difficult to explain what it was and how it happened, but I knew with certainty that someone was following me, and not with good intentions. As I learned later, my telepathy finally paid off, but right then, all I could think was run. As you know, I am a good runner, and I sprinted toward a wooded area of the park where I hoped I could hide. I heard steps running after me and realized that there were two of them. I had the advantage that I was familiar with the park, or I wouldn't be here to tell you about it. "She's getting away," someone shouted behind me, and that made me run even faster. I ran into the woods, almost spraining an ankle on something I hadn't seen in the dark. Still, I got a good head start, since my two pursuers obviously didn't know the area and trod carefully, slowing down. As a child, there was an oak tree I liked to climb and sit on one of its massive branches. I hadn't done that for a few years, but I still remembered how. The trees were thick there, and the darkness almost complete. The two men had a light, but it had a hard time penetrating the dense vegetation. There was a little clearing around my oak tree, and the men stopped there. Had they raised their heads? They would have seen me, so I pressed my body against the tree as much as I could. "Shit," said one of the men. "All that time waiting outside, and she got away." "It's your fault," said the other. "She must have heard you." "She couldn't have heard me, you idiot. We were too far away. You know she's a telepath. She must have felt our presence." It's weird to think how vulnerable I was then before my powers developed. Today, I would have laughed it away and gotten rid of them in a second. But right then, I was terrified. I couldn't figure out who these people were and why they were after me. As their conversation continued, it didn't make me any more comfortable. "Yeah, but that's why we're here. The boss said to bring him her head. If we don't, he'll kick our asses." "We don't bring any heads to anybody, stupid. It's a figure of speech. You see too many stupid movies. He wants her dead, and that's all." "Yeah, big shot? And how do we do it?" "We keep searching. She can't be too far away. I'll stay here and you keep going. Text me if you see anything." One man went, and the other remained there. I was stuck on that oak tree branch for who knows how long. Only I wasn't. Stretching my neck to try to see below so I could later identify my attacker, I lost my balance and dropped down right on him. "Ouch!" he cried in pain as he fell to the ground. I hurt too, but at that moment, I didn't care. The man was on his knees, trying to get up again, and that's when my basic training paid off. I know I had complained that all that survival techniques training was a waste of time for me, but it turned out that it wasn't. Before he managed to get up and stabilize himself, I landed him a juicy kick where it hurts. It was meant to make sure that he wouldn't be able to have children after that. As he doubled on himself, crying in pain, I landed my knee on his nose with all my strength. He finally went down and out without another word. I tried to recall the name of the instructor who had taught me that move. I needed to remember him in my prayers. One thing was sure. Those men knew where my parents lived, and I couldn't go back there. The closest place I knew where I could hide was my former school. It was obviously closed at night, but we had broken in once or twice, as a prank, and I knew how to do it. Taking a shortcut, I got to the school in 10 minutes. I hoped nobody had fixed the latch on the science class window, and they hadn't. I found a dark corner where I couldn't be seen from outside, if anybody looked, and sat down to think. Sleep was out of the question, and I wondered if my parents would realize that I was gone. In the morning, I got out of the school building the same way I had gone in. The streets were already full of people, which gave me a sense of safety. I still couldn't go home, so I walked to the train station instead. Straightening out things with my parents would have to wait. Back at the base, I stormed into ESA 15's office. "2 men tried to kill me," I said. It sounded like I was blaming ESA 15, and I was. "Why?" I demanded. "Tessa, what are you talking about? Why are you back?" I was shaking with fury and had to calm and tell my story coherently. I sat down, took a few breaths while ESA 15 watched me in silence, and then I told him the whole story. "That doesn't sound like anything that makes sense," he said, after hearing it all. "They must have mistaken you for somebody else. Why would anybody want to harm you?" "They said I'm a telepath," I almost screamed. "They were after me." "Calm down, Tessa. You are safe now. I'm sure there is some explanation for all that. I'll make inquiries," he said. As it turned out, he didn't. Or if he did, I never heard about any results. I didn't learn what that was all about until much later. But that's another story. In fact, those people ended up playing a very central role in my life. I'll tell you about it sometime. After a while, I let it go and convinced myself that I was safe because I was inside a government facility. I surely wasn't going to go home again anytime soon, and I knew how to handle my mother. "And what am I going to tell my mother?" I asked. She'll think that I ran away because we had a fight." "You'll think of something," said ESA 15. That was his standard answer to that kind of question. "I did. You are going to invite her over here," I said. "You know that that's not possible," ESA 15 retorted. "This is a highly classified location. How would I make it appear like a regular school?" "You'll think of something," I said with a smirk. "After all, it's all your fault," I added, remembering what one of the men had said at night in the woods. I won't bore you with the details, but ESA 15 set up a hell of a facade for his school. I knew he would come through. Chapter 13. On my 16th birthday, Aline took me dancing. I don't know if you've ever been to a small-town dance hall, but it can be great fun if you're in the right mood. She had invited a couple of local boys she had met before, and they had brought along a bunch of their own friends. The whole evening was full of laughter, and I danced my feet out. That same morning, ESA 15 had shown up at breakfast to wish me a happy birthday. He wasn't really good at saying things like that, which weren't directly related to work. The whole 2 sentences he managed to put together were stilted, but I appreciated the effort even more because I knew how hard it was for him. Later, I learned that this was his way to say goodbye. After a few days, he called me to his office and announced that he was leaving for a new position. Strangely enough, in a way, I was sorry to see him go. True, I hated him for everything he had done to me, but I also learned a lot from him and respected him for that. Being 16 felt different. Somehow, I suddenly felt like a grown-up. I realized that I had to shed my remaining childhood skin and fully embrace my ESA being. I think the reason was that I no longer felt like I lived in a make-believe world. The agency was real. I was a real agent, and my adult life was beginning. I guess most 16-year-old girls don't feel like that and still enjoy feeling and behaving like regular teenagers. But I was past that and had been for a long time. The night after my birthday, Aline came into my room. I immediately sensed that something was wrong. When I get a bad feeling, a premonition of sorts, that something will go wrong, my heartbeat accelerates, and right then, my heart was beating like crazy. "What's the matter? What's happening?" I asked. Aline took my hand and guided me to the bed. "Let's sit down," she said. She wasn't looking at me, and that frightened me. "I didn't want to tell you this yesterday, but I have some news." "What? What?" "I've got a new assignment, and I will be leaving the base soon," she said. "What? No, you can't do that. When?" "It's not immediate. I'll leave in approximately 2 months," she said. "Forget all that grown-up bullshit," I said to myself. "I have the right to feel like I am feeling right now." I thought it, and I started to cry like a little girl. Aline took me in her arms and tried to console me, just like she did on the first night so long ago, but nothing she could do could make it better. I cried my eyes out until the supply of tears ran dry. "You can't go. You can't do that to me," I insisted. "You know I don't want to, but that's not for me to decide." I knew. When you're in the service, you don't have a say over anything. You only delude yourself that you do. But all decisions are made for you. All that crying and emotions got me exhausted. We stopped talking, and I lay on my bed feeling powerless. Aline sat beside me, stroking my hair gently, until, amazingly, I fell asleep. She had that uncanny effect on me. The months after Aline's departure passed slowly. She couldn't tell me where she was going, or how, and whether we would be able to keep in touch, but we promised that we would meet again, and maybe we will. After she left, I made an effort to get to know some of the people who lived in the agent's wing better. I knew everybody by name, but I had never tried to befriend any of them before. It turned out that two boys, who were only a couple of years older than me, were really awesome. I spent time watching TV, playing card games and video games with them, and slowly our camaraderie grew into something like friendship. I even got closer than I had expected to one of them. He was cute, and obviously in need to burn a few hormones, and since spending time with him had brought me back to my days at the camp, and to Gary, we hit it off perfectly. It was fun, relaxing, without involving romance or drama. So when my turn came to leave the base, we parted as good friends. One day, out of the blue, I was summoned to Human Resources. I knew that such an office existed because I had seen the plaque next to a door, which said so, but I had never been there and didn't know what the job of Human Resources actually was. A bespectacled secretary took me to a stuffy little room where an elderly woman sat behind a desk that was barely visible under a mass of paper. "Sit down, Tessa," she said without looking at me. I sat down and waited patiently for her to speak. When at last she lifted her gaze, she looked at me through thick glasses. "You must be wondering why you were summoned," she said. "Yeah," I conceded. "Well then, there is an operation going on at a certain location, and they requested an ESA. Specifically, you." "What operation?" I asked. I hoped it wasn't again that northern thing. "I can't tell you that," she said. "Where is that location?" I asked. "I can't tell you that either." "So, who requested me specifically?" "I am not at liberty to say." I got up, gazed at her for a moment, and then leaned on her desk. I spoke slowly, enunciating my words. "You have been very informative. Thank you. If you don't have anything else to tell me, I have somewhere else to be." "Sit down, Tessa," the woman said, speaking calmly. "I can tell you that this is a new cutting-edge project, and the people who run it think you can be a great addition to it. You will not be forced to go there. It's your choice. If you choose to take this position, you will leave immediately. Since it is not known how long the project will require your presence, you should not plan on coming back here. Therefore, you should take all your essential belongings with you." I weighed that. I was being asked to accept joining a project I knew nothing about, which might go on for an unknown period of time. And what if when I got there, I hated it? On the other hand, refusing to go meant remaining at the base and keeping doing more of the same day after day. Life at the base was not uncomfortable, but I'd had as much of it as I could bear. Maybe I was letting myself into something as bad, or even worse, but it would be elsewhere, which was enough to appeal to me. "Where do I sign?" I asked, and the woman pushed a piece of paper to me, which I signed after skimming through it. I left the next day for an undisclosed destination. Little did I know that my life's real adventure was about to begin. And what a roller coaster that was. Of course, it still is, as you will see if you follow what I've done since then and what I am still doing. That shows you many things, like that you don't control the challenges that life throws at you, but you certainly control how you approach and handle them. But enough of that. Too much philosophizing never did any good to anybody. It's what you do when you have to act that matters. I hope you will keep following reports of my adventures. Nail-biting aside, I'm told they make for riveting reading. See you soon! This has been And Then She Saw, the prequel to the Tessa Extrasensory Agent series. Written by Kafir Luzado. Narrated by Claire Duncan. Copyright 2021 by Kafir Luzado. Production copyright by Kafir Luzado.